Hello, my name is Casey Smith, and thank you for joining me today for my presentation on the learning process. I am from Akron, Ohio, and I am a first grade teacher currently working on my master's degree in teacher leadership. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we as human beings learn and how we as teachers can use this information to help our students learn to the best of their abilities. So, in thinking about how we learn, it's important to consider every aspect that has been studied, what research is out there, what do we know, and what is there still to be learned. So, over the years there have been many different theories, including social theories, theories that interpret our behavior as how we learn, developmental theories, and also cognitive and brain-based theories. It's important for us to know as teachers how we as human beings learn, so that way we're not just simply teaching our students, we are helping them to get to a place of learning. In the past, there has been a huge focus on what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, what are we going to teach our students, and how are we going to communicate information to them, where all along it may have been more helpful for us to be focusing on how do our students learn this information? What are we going to do to get them to be able to be in a place of learning? So I'm going to go through and introduce a few different areas of research that have been studied and some of the theories about how we as human beings learn. One of the first areas of research that I thought was very interesting was Dr. Pam Alexander. In her video on this week's module, she talked about research that she participated in that had to do with psychological learning. And they ended up coming up with 6 areas of psychological research that really defined how people learn. So the first area was knowledge. What is it that people already know? What experiences and environments have they come from that have already built a knowledge base within them? The second is metacognition. This might seem like a really foreign word, but in actuality, all it means is thinking about your thinking. So in this psychological research, they found that metacognition plays a huge role in how we learn. The third part was motivation. What motivates us to learn? Why do we want to learn? Motivation can play a very huge part in students learning within the classroom. Developmental and individual differences played a part. The situation and context in which students were learning played a huge part. And then finally, the assessments that were being given played a part in how learners learn. Another theory that I find particularly interesting is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. So take a minute and just think about, how is it that you think you best learn? I know that personally, I am a type of person who I like interacting with others. That helps me to learn. And also, I can remember songs that I was taught when I was a 3rd grader many years ago. So for me, being taught new information in a musical format really appeals to my intelligence. Yours may be completely different. Maybe you learn through being in nature, and maybe you learn through numbers. Maybe you're the type of person that learns through seeing something. Or maybe you're the type of person that learns through having a verbal discussion with another person. All of these, and there are also a few more types of intelligences, were part of Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. And Gardner thought that instruction should incorporate multiple modalities of learning. So maybe there was a verbal part to a lesson, maybe there was a kinesthetic or a movement part. And he also believed that people learn based on what appeals to their own intelligence personality. The next theory about how people learn is constructivism. Constructivism is basically just what it sounds like. Learners can build upon what they already know and what they've already come to believe. So the way that I remember this is that it's like we're starting from a foundation and we're constructing on top of that. We're building on the knowledge that we already have and going from there to learn new things. So teachers can use constructivism in their favor by giving pre-assessments, giving attitude surveys, and figuring out what it is that their students already know, what beliefs their students already have, and using that to build upon their students' prior knowledge. The next theory is a name that you've probably heard before if you have taken any education class, and it's based on Lev Vygotsky's findings in 1978, and this is the social cognition theory of learning. Vygotsky believed that students learn within their zone of proximal development. Now, the zone of proximal development is what we nowadays would consider a student's instructional level. Not their frustrational level, not what they would get too frustrated with, and not what they're able to do independently, but what they can do with a push from teacher, what they can do with guidance and support, what they can potentially get to with that teacher support is known as the zone of proximal development. So Vygotsky believed that learning can occur when a teacher provides lessons within that potential development range, the ZPD. Finally, the last theory that I want to mention today is based on Piaget's findings in 1970, and that's the developmental stages and cognitive structures. Also, if you have taken any education class, you may have heard of this before. Piaget believed that there were four cognitive structures, developmental stages that students go through. The first one being sensory motor, which was from birth to age 2. Pre-operational from 2 years to 7 years of age. Concrete operational from age 7 to age 12. And then finally, formal operational. And students use their developmental stages to build cognitive structures, so like mind maps, and they do that based on their development. And the developmental stages can change as the students acquire more knowledge. It's not necessarily always tied to the age, but it is always occurring in the order that I mentioned. So now that we've learned a little bit about how we learn, it's important to consider brain research as we plan the lessons for our students within our classrooms. As presented in our course media, major findings have suggested that we as educators can use brain research to guide our practice within our classrooms. There are several major findings that can provide a lot of insight for us as teachers into what we can be doing within our classrooms to help our students learn to the best of their abilities. The first of those is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the idea that the brain can change function based on our experiences. And I'll go a little bit more in detail into that in a minute. Our brains are always looking for patterns. They are pattern-seeking machines. Emotion plays a huge role in learning, and it's important for us to consider that there are two types of memory within our brains. So when we think about brain research, one of the most important things that I find to be very interesting is that our brain's functions are literally shaped by our experiences. So what that means is that our brain is the only organ in our bodies that can change its functionality based on the input that we give it. So the experiences that we have really dictate what our brains are able to do. And in our course media, There was a presentation where it was mentioned that babies, when they are first born, they have the ability to hear sounds from any language. However, in English, we praise babies when they say the phonemes ma and da because they're saying mama and dada. And right there, we have given them some positive reinforcement. We have shown them that that input to their brain should be used, and therefore we kind of give them the backing to continue saying that even more. And then the sounds that aren't used, unfortunately, it's kind of like a use it or lose it. And that's why it's so hard for adults to learn languages. I know that I would personally love to learn a language, but it is very hard. So we can use this pliability of the brain to our advantage, especially if you are teaching young students, particularly preschool, kindergarten age. You are giving them the foundation for everything that they'll experience for the rest of their lives. So creating an environment rich with print, rich in vocabulary, in conversation and discussion. These are all ways that you can encourage that neuroplasticity in your students' brains. Another key part of learning and how our brains function is emotion. We will remember information that our brains process when there is a strong feeling attached to that information. For example, I can remember exactly where I was sitting and exactly what I was doing when the Twin Towers were attacked during 9/11. That was a very strong, sad emotion for me. It was a negative experience, and so because of that, I can remember very clearly. The same thing goes with what we are teaching within our classrooms. If we are creating positive, happy, upbeat, fun learning experiences, our students are going to remember them. If we attach positive emotion with the learning experiences within our classrooms, we're going to have students that are able to recall what they have been taught. And also, it's important to consider that the same goes the opposite way. Like my example of 9/11, students will also remember the negative experiences that they've had and the negative emotions that they've felt. So it's our job as educators to make sure that when they are in our care, our students are experiencing positive, happy emotions. The last finding about brain research is that we have two types of working memory, and memory is so much more than just rote memorization. A lot of times nowadays, the word memory is kind of like a taboo word in education, but in fact, our brains want to remember. So there are procedural memory, which is basically all of the procedures that you go through in a day: brushing your teeth, opening a door, walking to your car. All of these are procedures that your body and your brain knows how to go through. The other type of memory then, and the one that we can really utilize within our classrooms, is declarative or conscious memory, where you're able to remember facts, recall details, and say, what you had for dinner last night, or recall important information from a book that you've read. If we can go beyond that procedural memory and use declarative memory within our classrooms, we can understand what it is that our students are going to be able to remember and what they'll then be able to do. One model of teaching that was presented in our course media was the RAD model of teaching, and it takes into account three parts of the brain: the reticular activating system, which is where all information is first processed, and we decide whether that information is safe, whether it is scary, whether it is worthwhile, and then we go on from there. The next part is the amygdala. This determines if an experience is positive or negative. And then finally, dopamine, which is released in pleasurable learning experiences. The goal is that we want to provide our students with an engaging, exciting learning experience that really piques their interest and kind of stimulates that reticular activating system. Then we want to make sure that that experience is going to be a positive one. And finally, we want to make sure that we're doing engaging activities like movement and laughter that release a pleasurable dopamine within the brain. Finally, one way that we can think about our teaching within our classrooms is by using the mastery model. The mastery model is where we want our students to acquire knowledge or a new skill. And students can do that by working toward mastering a specific concept. When we do this, we want to use thinking goals. We want to consider the environment. Where are students coming from? What are their backgrounds? What are their prior knowledge? We want to think about what motivates them. Students who are working toward mastery of a skill are going to be highly motivated by their successes. We want to think about the principles of mastery, and finally, we want to give our students outcomes. Thank you for listening today. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you were able to take away some new information about how we learn.